Let me,
Oh,
let me
sorry.
just,
Do you mind if we record the session?
not at all. Please,
Oh,
please do. On the proviso that you send me a copy, please.
okay.
So, um, what I want to do is do that, and then I think I want to do that, and I think I want to do that. So, okay. I just want to know, okay, no, it's not, it doesn't seem to be sharing yet. We try that again. You're not seeing my screen that I'm sharing, are you?
We see a icon now.
Sculpture.
Ah, a little sculpture. Okay,
Yeah.
good. I'm flying blind here because I can't see what I can just see my reflection there. So, okay, this little chap here.
Oh, sorry, it has disappeared now, but we could
Is it
see it.
disappeared? Okay.
Yeah, but we could see it.
All right, let's just check now. Is it back?
Yes,
Yes.
it's back.
Okay, cool. Okay, this little chap here, anybody can hazard a guess as to who this chap is? Any takers? It's very obscure, so I'm hoping nobody gets it. But anyhow, I'm going to come back to this chap now. But what I want to talk to you about is the exciting part of the world. So are you looking at a graph now? I'm sure, I just want to be sure my slides are
Yes,
working. You're looking at a graph.
yes, yes.
So, colleagues, I've been in practice, and I suppose just like Eldred, I've been in practice for 25 years now. So the likelihood is that you guys starting your career now, you're probably going to have 25 years and then another 25 years on top of that. But just it's going to happen at a very exciting time for you. I mean, especially in Africa, huge population growth and lots of very cool projects that you're going to be working on. I understand you're working on a specific project there now, apartment buildings, etc. But there's going to be a lot of that stuff in your life going forward. And it's a very, very exciting time to be part of that. But I don't think we must look, we must fail to look at where we've come from as a profession. And I say we as a profession for a very specific reason. It's a kind of an illusion that we've separated out ourselves from architects and from quantity surveyors and from um, any range of mechanical facade engineers, etc. So this guy here, um, he, he, he was an architect in Africa many, many, many years ago. And his name is that. Can anybody read that? It's Imhotep. It's a guy 4,000 something years ago. And he at that stage, now you talk about multidisciplinary, but this guy is the reason why he's famous is because before that time, nobody kind of recorded who was in charge of designing and building buildings. But this guy, Imhotep, um, was recorded as the architect of the Great Pyramid of Djoser. This is like 4,000 years ago. The important thing to realize, though, is that in spite of this incredible complexity that went into putting a building like this together at that time, it was put together very differently from how buildings are put together today. So if we look at a building that Eldred and I worked on together many years ago, 10 years ago now, the Nelson Mandela Bay Stadium, fantastic building, uh, concept architects from Germany, very, very talented bunch. But if you look at, I'm going to come back to something else there now. If you look at the way in which that building was put together, the stadium building, and you look at the complex range of players, project managers and health and safety people and social facilitators and quantity surveyors, civil engineers, structural engineers, concept architects, architect record. That was me there, me and my huge team. Mechanical engineer, facade engineer, interior designers, IT consultants, accessibility consultants. We've kind of got used to the idea that we as structural engineers or we as architects are just doing our job. We just got like one part to play, which is great because we can become specialized, but it's also not so great because nobody kind of keeps track of the big picture. Nobody is really, but in the back in the day of Imhotep, it was basically the pharaoh and Imhotep, and then he had so he did a whole lot of all these functions, according to whatever's left from the record. But this is where it comes from. This idea now that we have all these different specializations. The distinction between an architect and a structural engineer is really quite recent. It's not something that's come back for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, if you look at this project here, there's another project that Eldred and I are very proud of. We won the Fulton Award for this. It's a project here in Port Elizabeth. But where does the line here between structural engineering start and architecture begin? The best buildings and the best structures that I know are the ones in which the architectural concept is the structure, and the structure is the architectural concept. And I think more and more, or less and less, we're seeing that kind of thing happening, even though it's the oldest form of building that comes way back. And that's the kind of building that I love, and that's the kind of building that I would encourage all of you to seek out, and ones in which there's real collaboration, not just doing my job, but real collaboration. If you think about the ancient structures from all over the world, these are most beautiful structures. I mean, this is the Great Wall of China, one of the most beautiful structures, but actually a completely utilitarian object. All it had to do was keep out the Huns or the Mughals. I can't remember who it was built to keep out. But everybody involved in a project, or any project, was deemed to be worthy of putting our best foot forward. And sadly, what I've come to see in my years in practice is that not everyone takes that thing seriously. People become specialized, so the mechanical engineer says, well, as long as the air cools down, I've done my job. The structural engineer may tend to, and this is my appeal to you, may just say, well, as long as it stands out, I've done my job. But look at the fantastic engineering projects that were carried out thousands of years before people like us got a chance to do any work. People really took pride in making something beautiful and nice, even though they were utilitarian structures meant to keep out animals. But look, in the last century, this is the Berlin Wall. You know, it's just like, as long as it does its job, who cares what it messes up? Who cares what it does? We're just doing our job. We're building the Berlin Wall. We don't give a shit. We're just making sure that the cars get from point A to B. We don't give a shit about what's happening. And this is a tendency that I'm hoping that we're going to begin, or we are, I mean, I'm beginning to see signs of that. We're beginning to move out of that, regardless of our discipline. We can't hide behind the idea that we're just doing our job. I suppose just doing our job to keep the sea out, but what a horrible place to walk around this ugly stuff here. So that's what I think you want to hear me speak more about is about this whole list of interdisciplinary people here and how they work together in a project. All I can say is it's a problem, it's fun, it's a huge challenge, and what I hate about all of this stuff is people hide behind the narrow definition of their job, and they don't care about the product that comes out. But what I love about it is the challenge to get to know all the clever people, beautiful people working in all these different disciplines. And I think the way for us to move forward, and where I found things to be successful, is us to humble ourselves in our disciplines as architects, humble ourselves and understand the language of the quantity surveyor. And as quantity surveyors, to humble ourselves and to understand what the structural engineer is trying to do. There's a hell of a lot of professional arrogance that goes around where we think that we understand what the other guy does. We actually don't understand what the other guy does. So I'm really big up to you and your team for having something like this, to take the effort to at least, what does a guy from Planet Architect, what does he say when he talks? Because when we don't, I mean, I don't know any of you guys have been to PE, but you'll recognize this is the Swartkops River. It's a beautiful estuary, actually. But a whole bunch of construction industry types, including architects and structural engineers, but a whole bunch of other types, were all just doing their job when they built a ugly railway line right across the wetland. And a whole lot of electrical engineers were just doing their job when they built a blimmin' ugly power station right up here in what was Flamingo country. And the guys that designed the sewer system put a place here, Fishwater Flats, a sewage treatment. They were just doing their job. The architects probably, or the structural engineers at least, did fantastic towers here to get the smoke out of the chimney here, and the flyovers going over here, and the fantastic transportation engineering stuff and the rail engineering. What I'm saying is a whole lot of very clever people, including the guys that did the engineering of the salt mines here, did very clever stuff. And they were just doing their job, but collectively they messed up the whole environment. And I want to leave us with that, and maybe a challenge to us. And how do we ensure that as young designers, as young people in the construction industry, we don't end up repeating what the generation that has passed has done? Because none of these guys have done anything wrong individually in their professions. They probably all won awards for all the work they did, yeah. But you put that whole lot together, and it becomes environmental destruction. And if we're going to be doubling our population, or almost doubling our population in the next 50 years, and we're going to be doubling the impact on the environment's going to is already cracking, you know. So we've all got to be very much more cautious. Chairperson, who is our chairperson? That's what I was thinking about when I wanted to talk to the 5-6 of you.
Is that sorry, Tim? Is that the N2 at the bottom of that screen?
Yeah.
Going past P?
Yeah, it's the N2 going down there, like that.
And that's the river you pass over when you're leaving PE towards like Grahamstown area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Swartkops. It's horrible now, but I mean, it just could have been this world-class estuary. You know, I mean, you see the flamingos like wading around here in some of these dodgy like leftover pieces of lake, but they still come there. You know, it must have been a fantastic place.
Yeah. I know the industry is obviously trying to be more sustainable in that, but do you still see quite a lot of developers not really considering long-term effects and all that?
Well, it's very hard because you know, when you wear the cap of developer, as I've done from time to time, and Elder's done from time to time, you're motivated by sustainability of another kind. I mean, you have to generate more revenue than you have expense, so it's much more tricky. But at the end of the day, I don't think we must think of developer as somebody different from the kind of people we are. I mean, they come from our ranks, and they hang around with us at cocktail parties, and they are on our Facebook or whatever. It's not a different species. It's actually us, you know. So we're talking about a reflection of ourselves, or people who would listen to people like ourselves, or people who would be influenced by people like ourselves. I don't think we must. Part of, I think, what I'm saying when I talk about things like this, I don't think we must underestimate the potential of ourselves as built environment professionals, as engineers, to have an influence on society, to be thought leaders, and not to be quiet and vocal around our narrow specialization. The word engineer carries a hell of a lot of weight. It's one of the few professional terms that have continued to hold its gravitas. Is that the right word? And the opinion of a professional engineer is taken very, very seriously, you know.
Okay, awesome. Do you find that there are a lot more firms or companies these days that are moving towards a more multidisciplinary approach to a development or project?
I've worked with multidisciplinary companies before, and they are few and far between. They were probably more popular in the 70s even than now, but there's been a great tendency towards specialization, and I think it has to do with risk management as well, and the insurance companies come into play, and there's a great pressure for people not to work outside of their box for fear of litigation, for fear of insurance risk and claims. So sadly, there's a tendency in the opposite direction. And maybe this is why I'm trying to find a voice against it. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that it causes significant problems. I think it also has to do, to be honest, this thing of all of these professions here. I mean, I would theorize it has to do with the same kind of mentality that broke industries apart in the Industrial Revolution, you know, where the idea was to break everything down into a production line where one guy just does one thing, so you can pay him a lot less, you know, because one guy had to make the whole wagon, then he's a craftsman, he's an expert, he's knowledgeable, he's powerful. So maybe it's, I'm not looking for a conspiracy theory, but I think it's a economy that tends to try to break things down into its smallest component parts so it can be stronger and dominate over them. You know, one thing I didn't tell you about this guy, Imhotep, because he was just Imhotep reporting to the pharaoh, is a very, very powerful guy. So he was so powerful in society that one of his titles was prime minister. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's why things have become so multidisciplinary. It's because the pharaohs don't want a whole bunch of the pharaohs of our day don't want a whole bunch of powerful people around. If you break Imhotep down into 20 component parts, it's a lot easier to boss 20 people around than it is to boss one powerful guy. Maybe that's why it happened. So it's a lot to do with power dynamics and economy and politics and all of that. But I think the net result is not good for the built environment and the natural environment.
Thank you for that. I found that to be very enlightening. But with specialization, we get better and better at what we do.
Yes.
We can, okay, I don't think it would be possible to go back to being Imhotep, and I'm very good in architecture and mechanical and all that, but don't we have ways in which, like practical ways in which real companies in industry can get all those different professionals and specialists seated in one in one table, I mean, with one agreement, and not one person like looking for, I just want easy flat slabs all the time, engineer looking out for themselves, but everyone trying to fight for, you know, this big goal of the bigger picture. Can't that be fostered and bred in a new, or rather existing, society of professionals and specialists?
It's a good question. I'm hoping you have an answer for that, because my generation couldn't come up with an answer. We're the generation that are building this crap here. You know, it's like, look at that. And each of these guys think they're brilliant, building all this stuff. Look at these guys. They didn't have any specialization. Look how beautiful this stuff is. You know, why there's something really wrong. If I look at any of the inner city, historical inner cities, even of South Africa, the stuff that we're building today, we actually just can't build that stuff anymore. Now, I actually really, as I speak to you, I don't know what's gone wrong, because we have a larger economy, we have more expertise, we have more educated people. So I'm not sure why our built environment is generally of a poorer quality than it was even 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It's perplexing to me, and I don't think enough people are asking the question or thinking about it or discussing. I certainly don't know the answer. It's perplexing. It really is perplexing.
Also, Tim, I've got a little bit of, might be on a side note, but in recent couple of years, I myself have noticed, and I'm sure you have as well, there's this leniency towards like this modern architecture sort of thing.
Yeah.
Where everyone is going, they're leaving whatever, like, for example, all these, the older structures that we've seen that you've shown us, they're leaving the sort of approach towards architecture, towards the structure, thinking that perhaps it would be difficult, I'd imagine, and they're all leaning towards a more simpler, a more monochromatic look and stuff like that. What do you reckon that is? Like, is it because I don't know, we're all being taught in a specific manner, or what do you think that is?
Well, I think some of the most pleasant environments that I've been in are actually designed in the modern idiom. So I don't think a stylistic approach towards modernism is easily equated with bad quality. Number one, I think it's just I think quality in the built environment just comes through as an expression of the designer, of the creator's care that he's taken. And I think the contemporary way of building, and there are some beautiful contemporary buildings, some of the best places in the world. My favorite architect is a Japanese guy called Tadao Ando, who designs mainly with and fantastic. And why is most of the contemporary in that idiom? I think it can only be because the technologies that we have available to us are different to what the Romans had, different to what the Greeks had, different to the builders of the Great Zimbabwe. The Hindu temples were built in a certain way because that was the material that was available to them, the technology available. Our material and our technology will lead to a certain form. We have fantastic access to high tensile steel and incredible glazing technologies we have, and we can go higher and longer and wider. I don't have a concern with any of that. I have a concern with where we apply technology without taking care. Yeah, the Chinese have applied great technology, great care to a very primitive technology, basically stone. Here, people have applied, this is a very contemporary looking structure, but I think great care was taken here in how to put this together, and it's very much in the modern idiom. But here, people have taken modern technology of casting concrete, reinforced, etc., but without any care at all. So I think the central ingredient to me is not a stylistic approach, but the idea of what we're doing matters. What we're doing is important. We're not just doing our job. We are building something for the community that we live in, however we define that term.
Fair enough. Thank you for that.
Just a question from me, Tim. I guess you mentioned how, at least for our generation, at least we're being exposed more to this multidisciplinary approach to solving problems for society. Now, with regards to say us, some of us might be working next year. But I believe at like the entry point, your I'm not sure, maybe it's different in different companies, but your leeway as someone who's, still learning about the profession and that is a bit less, and so your influence or what it is you think might not be as great, or am I looking at that wrong? If that makes sense, yeah, Tim.
I don't think you must humble yourself because you're younger. I think you must humble yourself, but I don't think you must humble yourself to the point of silence. I think you must learn from the people that you're working with, of course, but what they're good at, and I'm really generalizing here, but you're going to be moving into an engineering practice, and you're going to be working with very, very, very experienced, very, very, very clever people, but that may have lost already some of the consciousness that you would be bringing in. So where your voice may be stronger, you must feel where your voice is stronger, and don't be afraid. It's your duty, really, to bring that voice into a practice. When I left university and I came into practice, I felt almost that it was a parallel discipline to academia. So practice and the academy, don't think of them necessarily as being completely sequential. Don't think that when you go into work next year or the year thereafter, don't think that it's like going onto the next level of progression. It's almost like it's two different things. It's like practice is parallel to it. So there's things that you, there's levels that you've reached at university that you could never reach in practice. And there's levels in practice that you'd never reach at university. But don't think of it as you're coming in right at the bottom of the pile and now you're starting at zero. In many ways it is like that, but in other ways there are contributions that you would be able to make that the guy that's been there for 20 years is not going to be able to make it. He's just forgotten that he knew all this stuff. He's forgotten that he had that perspective that you will bring. Josh, I think that was you talking there. I can't, but I'm not sure if that's what you were talking to. But the other advice I would have, and I really would encourage you to try to do this, but really try to engage and socialize with people across disciplines, heads, and try to not fall into the trap of this professional arrogance, and you'll see when you move into the industry, there's all kinds of inside jokes about, architects hate quantity surveyors and quantity surveyors hate town planners and whatever, but it's all a joke. Don't fall into that stuff. Try to engage with these people on a social level as well. Just try to find out what motivates them, what makes them tick, what makes them want to get out of bed in the morning, and try also to pass that on to people in other disciplines. So if you are a structural engineer, try to let people into your heart. Try to engage with an architect or a town planner or a quantity surveyor. Let them into your heart at a personal level. We're all personal people. I mean, we all have personal lives. Let them, and you have a profession that you got to hold on to, not got to, but 25 years goes very quickly, believe it or not. And you go crazy if you don't love it. It's almost impossible. You can probably fake it for a year or two. 5 years, it's a push. 10 years, you're going to go cray-cray, So you've actually got to fall in love with what you're doing in some way and pass on that thing that you're in love with about your profession to as many co-disciplinarians, if that's a term, as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. That was very, very insightful. And then just another question. It's a question I've asked Eldred before.
Sure.
I think I'll say structural engineers. I guess since in this case that's a role we're kind of in. If you've come across any special ones, what stood out? Was it that them getting to understand what makes you tick as an architect? Projects you've worked on in the past, what's set, say, certain structural engineers or certain quantity surveyors or just people from different disciplines apart from the others you've worked with?
Eldred is the best structural engineer that I know, and he's a it's very interesting. What happens with large engineering companies like the one that Eldred is playing a significant leadership role in, is it becomes very sad because many very highly skilled design engineers end up having to spend 8 hours of the day doing management stuff and corporate stuff. Eldred and I have been friends for a while as well, so maybe that's also blurring why I find that he and I are able to work together so comfortably, like on a no-nonsense basis and no posturing and no posing and all of that. So maybe that actually does help. Maybe that's why I am biased towards my relationship with Eldred as a structural engineer, because he's able to tell me where to get off, and I'm able to immediately cut through any bullshit that there may be or whatever. So I think maybe the answer is a long way around. It's not a specific type. Maybe it has to do with relationships and like building professional relationships over time with people that understand your strong points and that you understand their strengths and their weaknesses, so that together you can create, because it is a together thing. The idea, the caricature that immature architects would have of structural engineers would be that, look, I'm the architect, you just tell me where the rebar must go and, you know, get out of my way. And the caricature that the structural engineer would have of the architect is, listen, I put this whole building together, make it stand, and whatever, you choose the paint colors and get out of my way, you know? So, but like neither of those are correct, of course. And I suppose it's building a relationship between, and I think the relationship between structural engineer and architect is probably more important than the relationship between any of the other disciplines in the built environment team, because it's between them, it's a to and fro that creates a design. And you'll see the frumpiness and the lack of sophistication in designs that are architect-led and engineer-spec'd, and vice versa, engineer-led and architect-spec'd. You'll see the lack of sophistication in them, and you'll see the lack of artistry in those. So I think, yeah, that is what would stand out for me, is working with a structural engineer who knows me and I know them. I think it's important. And it is a long-term thing. I mean, this profession that you're going into now, it is it's not something that you ordinarily find, that you break into it and within 6 months it does seem to be about relationships and takes a bit more time.
Right. Thank you. Very, very insightful again. Yeah. I could ask another question if the other guys don't have questions at the moment. You mentioned that you worked on a Nelson Mandela Stadium. I can only imagine a number of different professionals it is you work with in a project that big. Have you worked in similar projects, and what are, say, some of the challenges you face from an architect point of view, and then in a project that big? That's how to describe myself.
Those projects are are horrible to work on, to be honest. So the larger multidisciplinary stuff, when they built a casino here in PE, we work also with Eldred also on that project. I've much preferred the smaller, more intimate projects. The larger projects, the big ones that you like to put in your CV and impress people around a braai on are actually very, very painful to work on, and it has a lot to do with communication and people crapping on each other for not doing their stuff on time and who's delaying who and who's causing. It's just a lot of political nonsense. So, and if you're in a position where you're running a firm, as I am and as I was in those big projects, so I would have, as an architect on the stadium, I would have a team of 4 or 5 architects, and there'd be 4 different practices, 4 different architectural practices, each with their own team there. So all I would ever do on the stadium project is run around apologizing to my bosses for, the project managers and the city engineer, for apologizing for where I've messed up, and then trying to beat up on my people for not getting it right. And it's just all that kind of they are big and they're unwieldy, and I can understand why people don't enjoy them, and people struggle to make it all the way through a project without resigning in those things. I far prefer, interestingly, private sector projects. I've struggled to enjoy, and I've done a lot of public sector stuff, prisons and law courts and government offices and all that kind of stuff, huge stuff, Out and I've just been working on a huge thing in Bishu as well, 47,000 square meters of office space. But at the end of the day, you're a live, living individual, and it's about the frustration of working with public sector where nobody can make a decision and everybody's dodging things, and it's very, very nice. Probably the small projects. Right now, I'm working on a small project, the Bavianskloof, where I'm building little huts that are 15 square meters each in the mountains. Timber huts, beautiful, fantastic stuff. Maybe it's because I've done the big stuff, and I don't have that ego problem of wanting to do big stuff. Maybe now I'm more comfortable to do the small stuff. I don't know. Architects have got big ego problems normally, but I can tell you those big things are quite a challenge at a personal